Hey everybody, today we're debating whether or not Islam requires the violent persecution of Christians, and we're starting right now with David Wood's opening statement. Thanks so much for being with us. The floor is all yours, David.
Thank you, James, and thank you, Daniel, for suggesting this topic. Does Islam require the violent persecution of Christians? I have no idea why Daniel wanted to debate this topic. I assume he's got some brilliant argument up his sleeve. And I must be totally deranged for agreeing to debate Daniel when he's got some brilliant argument that's about to destroy me and end my career. But I really want to know what the argument is, so I guess I'll have to debate to find out. Now, I'm obviously not going to argue that Islam requires the violent persecution of Christians in every situation. It doesn't. If the Muslim community is too weak to violently subjugate non-Muslims, then it's the wrong time to violently subjugate Christians. And if Christians have already been subjugated and have become dhimmis and they've agreed to certain terms and they're paying jizya, there's no need to violently persecute them. There are plenty of teachings in the Muslim sources that seem to call for the ongoing degradation and humiliation of Christians even after they've become dhimmis. But there are other teachings in which Muslims are told to honor their agreements with dhimmis. So I'll grant for the sake of argument that there's no requirement to violently persecute dhimmis. So what does that leave us with? Well, there are lots of Christians in the world who aren't dhimmis. There are lots of Christians who don't ever want to become dhimmis. Like me, you can saw my head off. I ain't giving you dime one, Daniel. Are Muslims supposed to live in a state of perpetual peace and harmony with non-Muslims? Not according to Muhammad. And this brings us to our first problem, Islam's emphasis on jihad and martyrdom. Islam programs people to want to fight non-Muslims. In Sahih Muslim 33, Muhammad declares, "I've been commanded to fight against people till they testify that there is no God but Allah, that Muhammad is the messenger of Allah, and they establish prayer and pay zakat. And if they do it, their blood and property are guaranteed protection on my behalf, except when justified by law, and their affairs rest with Allah." Fighting such an essential part of Islam that Muhammad says in Sunan an-Nasai 3099, "Whoever dies without having fought or having thought of fighting, he dies on one of the branches of hypocrisy." According to Muhammad, you're a hypocrite if you don't fight, or in situations where the Muslim community is weak, you don't at least wish you could fight. The emphasis on fighting unbelievers, combined with promises of virgins in paradise, led to an obsession with jihad and martyrdom in Islam. In Sahih al-Bukhari 2797, Muhammad says, "By him in whose hands my soul is, I would love to be martyred in Allah's cause, and then come back to life and then get martyred, and then come back to life again and then get martyred, and then come back to life again and then get martyred." Being martyred while waging jihad gets you lots of stuff in paradise, gets you lots of virgins in paradise. So if you want to spend eternity deflowering virgins, you'll want to be martyred as much as possible. Why is this relevant here? Well, there are approximately 2 billion Christians in the world, and Muhammad made a religion that calls for the violent subjugation of the entire world and that presents jihad against unbelievers as your golden ticket to the virgin factory. Does Islam require the violent subjugation, the violent persecution of Christians? Of course it does. You're not going to subjugate the world and make Christians pay jizya by getting together and eating falafel at an interfaith picnic. You have to fight. The second problem for Daniel is that the Quran requires the violent persecution of Christians. The Quran does. We're all familiar with Surah 9, verse 29, which commands Muslims to fight Christians until Christians pay the jizya. That would actually be enough to prove my point. But when we read the verse in context, it removes all doubt. The passage begins at verse 28 of Surah 9 and goes through verse 33. Let's read the entire passage so we can see how Allah requires the violent persecution of Christians. Verse 28, "O you who believe, truly the pagans are unclean, so let them not, after this year of theirs, approach the sacred mosque. And if you fear poverty, soon will Allah enrich you, if He wills, out of His bounty, for Allah is all-knowing, all-wise." So Allah tells Muslims not to let the pagans anywhere near the mosque in Mecca. Some of the Muslims were worried that this would hurt their trade deals with the pagans, so it would hurt them financially. But Allah says he can enrich them to make up for any losses. How is Allah going to enrich them? Next verse. Fight those who believe not in Allah, nor the last day, nor hold that forbidden which hath been forbidden by Allah and his messenger, nor acknowledge the religion of truth from among the people of the book, Jews and Christians, until they pay the jizya with willing submission and feel themselves subdued. So Allah is going to enrich Muslims by having Muslims fight Jews and Christians until Jews and Christians pay the jizya, tribute money, to acknowledge their inferiority. But why fight Jews and Christians? Aren't we the people of the book? Aren't we believers too? Next verse. And the Jews say, Ezra is the son of Allah, and the Christians say, the Messiah is the son of Allah. These are the words of their mouths. They imitate the saying of those who disbelieved before. Allah's curse be upon them, how they are turned away. So, contrary to what Allah says about Jews and Christians in other parts of the Quran, it turns out that we aren't real monotheists. When Muhammad needed to fight us to make money, we became mushriks. Jews call Ezra the son of God. They don't, by the way. And Christians call Jesus the son of God. Allah got that right, at least. This is the justification for fighting us. Notice that already, if Allah commands Muslims to fight Christians because of our beliefs, does Islam require the violent persecution of Christians? Sure sounds like it. But have we done anything else? Next verse, 931. They took their rabbis and their monks to be their lords, besides Allah, and Christ the son of Mary. Yet they were commanded to worship but one God. There is no God but he. Praise and glory to him. Far is he from having the partners they associate with him. So now Allah says that Jews and Christians take rabbis and monks as lords besides God. We don't, by the way. And he goes on to say that he's far from having the partners we associate with him. So we associate partners with Allah. That makes us mushriks. Any other reason to fight us? Next verse. They desire to put out the light of Allah with their mouths. Notice, it says with their mouths, not by the sword. This is referring to what we say. But Allah will not allow but that his light should be perfected, even though the unbelievers may detest it. Allah won't allow Jews and Christians to spread our false beliefs through preaching. But how is Allah going to stop us? Next verse, 33. It is he who hath sent his messenger, Muhammad, with guidance and the religion of truth, Islam, to prevail it over all religion, even though the idolaters may detest it. How is Islam going to prevail? We already read it, Surah 9, verse 29. Fight those who believe not in Allah until they pay the jizya with willing submission and feel themselves subdued. Now, that's the entire passage. Every criterion for fighting Christians in this passage has to do with our religious beliefs and practices. So if Allah commands Muslims to fight Christians because of our beliefs and practices, does Islam require the violent persecution of Christians? Sure sounds like it. Perhaps Daniel will say that Christians can avoid the violence by becoming dhimmis, but that won't work. Allah demands our silence on a specific issue. We're not allowed to say that Jesus is the Son of God. But the identity of Jesus is part of the gospel. And we know from the book of Acts that even though Christians were happy generally to follow the local laws laid down by various authorities, if the authorities ordered them not to preach the gospel, they responded, "We must obey God, not man." So the Quran commands Muslims to fight Christians until we stop saying that Jesus is the Son of God, but we can't stop saying that Jesus is the Son of God. If Allah orders Muslims to fight Christians until we stop doing something that we're not allowed to stop doing, then the Quran requires the violent persecution of Christians. Third problem for Daniel. Muhammad ordered his followers to execute apostates, and we're at the beginning of an avalanche of apostasy. Muslim apologists like Zakir Naik and Ahmed Deedat spent decades lying to their followers. Now Muslims are realizing that their apologists lied to them about Muhammad and the Quran, and they're leaving Islam like it's a sport. When Muslims leave Islam, they usually become either Christians or atheists. Muhammad ordered his followers to kill them. So when Muslims today realize that Muhammad is the most obvious false prophet in history, when they realize that they can't take the ramblings of an illiterate 7th century Arabian caravan robber seriously, many of them become Christians and many of them become atheists. Muhammad said to kill them. If a Muslim leaves Islam and becomes a Christian, what does Islam require? Islam requires that he be executed if he refuses to return to Islam. Is killing people because they've converted to Christianity violent persecution? Absolutely. So does Islam require the violent persecution of Christians? Indisputably. Putting all of this together, Islam calls for the violent subjugation of the world and produces an obsession with martyrdom. This leads to the violent persecution of Christians. The Quran commands Muslims to fight Christians until we pay the jizya and stop saying that Jesus is the Son of God. This obviously requires the violent persecution of Christians. And Islam says that when Muslims convert to Christianity, they have to be killed for converting. That's violent persecution. But as I acknowledged at the beginning of my opening statement, if the Muslim community is too weak to subjugate non-Muslims, then it's just not the right time to violently persecute Christians. So the most obvious path to peace available to us is for the Muslim community to never outnumber or be stronger than the non-Muslim community. This means that we can establish peace by making more ex-Muslims. We can establish peace through the avalanche of apostasy. If the avalanche of apostasy is the path to peace, if the avalanche of apostasy is the way to avoid the violent persecution of Christians, sign me up. I'd be happy to help you with that one, Daniel.
Thank you very much for that opening. Thank you very much for that opening statement from David. And I want to let you know, folks, if it's your first time here at Modern Day Debate, we are a neutral platform hosting debates on science, religion, and politics. We hope you feel welcome no matter what walk of life you are from. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button as we have many more juicy debates coming up in the future. With that, we're going to kick it over to Daniel for his 12-minute opening as well. Thanks for being with us, Daniel. The floor is all yours.
Alhamdulillah, salatu wassalam ala Rasulillah. Thank you, James and David. Let's get to the heart of the matter here. David says that Islam endorses continuous violent jihad against Christians until they convert or pay jizya. And once Christians are living under an Islamic state, they're constantly discriminated against. And according to David, that is persecution. Let me make this easy for you, David. Guilty as charged. Islam is expansionist. It does require expansionist jihad. And when Islam is in power, it does discriminate against non-Muslims. Guilty as charged. But guess what, David? Every political system requires war and discrimination. There never has been, and there never will be, a political system that says we should not use violence to gain power and resources. There never has been, and there never will be a political system that says all beliefs and ways of life should be respected equally. There is no such political system. So why are you judging Islam according to these impossible standards? Let me explain. Imagine a world in which there is no violence, no war, and you can have a political system where every religion and ideology is equal, and there's no discrimination against any group. Sounds good, right? Well, it doesn't matter because this is an impossible world. No such world has ever existed. If such a world could exist, David's criticism of Islam might make sense. In the real world, however, David's criticism of Islam makes absolutely no sense because offensive wars and inequality necessarily exist. This is for the simple reason that groups are always engaged in violent struggle for power and resources. That has literally been the history of the world since the beginning of the human race. So Christian apologists focus on these two issues: expansionist war, and then the whole inequality / dhimmi issue. First, let's talk about expansionist war. David wants to blame Islam for having expansionist war, but guess what? Every group, once it has power, engages in expansionist war. Literally every single group, past, present, and future. We have to have a realistic view of the world. In reality, relationships between nations are based on power, and nations are constantly competing for power and resources. The Muslim stance toward any other nation will depend on power. So where Muslims don't have power, they can pursue a political strategy of qualified peace and reconciliation with other groups, or even a situation where non-Muslims are privileged over Muslims. This was actually the case with the early Muslim community, not only in Mecca, but also with the Treaty of Hudaybiyah. When the Muslim nation does have more power, then it will pursue a strategy of spreading Islam through military conquest and privileging the interests of Muslims. Sounds terrible to the liberalized ear. How could you spread religion by force? But this is not just what Muslims do. All groups pursue this kind of two-tiered strategy. The difference is Muslims are honest about this strategy, whereas other groups are not. For example, America spins this beautiful picture about how it believes all countries in the world have equal rights and sovereignty. But the reality is American foreign policy is always aiming to create a world order that is under the control of American power and serving American interests. And this is pursued through all manner of coercion, war, violence. What would make America stop doing this? Nothing. Only if America loses power and is forced to stop by another more powerful nation. The same exact thing is the case with Russia, China, India, Israel, literally every nation. If you don't have power, try to forge peace and reconciliation. If you are in power, violently expand. Historically, Christian nations have literally followed this same exact policy. Jews have followed this exact policy. Hindus have literally always followed this same policy. Hindus are this nice little peaceful group when they live as minorities, but once they get a little taste of political power, like in modern India, they start bulldozing mosques and lynching beef eaters. So Islam has the same view that literally all other nations have, including Christian nations in the past. Now, some Christians might say, no, we don't believe in a Christian state that seeks to violently subjugate the world to Christian norms and advance Christian interests. Now, isn't it convenient that Christians take this line of peace and reconciliation in modern times now that they aren't in power? This is the pattern with Christians. When Christians were a weak minority under Roman rule in the first 3 centuries, they talked a lot about minority rights and how there should be limits on Roman control. But as soon as Christians come into power with Constantine, they're all about crusading and subjugating the pagans and the heretics. And then when they're disempowered again in the modern world vis-a-vis secularism, then once again, they take this pacifist stance. That's fine. I'm not faulting Christians for their pragmatism. But the difference between Muslims and Christians is that Muslims are honest about this reality, while Christians keep reinterpreting the Bible to pretend like their religion is all about peace and religious freedom. Okay, so that's the answer to expansionist jihad. Now let's talk about dhimmis. One of the main assumptions that Christian apologists like David embed in their arguments against Islam is that there is potentially a system of government where every belief and way of life is treated equally and everyone lives in peace, and it's just these intolerant Muslims who are trying to spoil the party. This depiction of Muslims is only effective because it's premised on this theoretical system of government. But the reality is such a system of government is an impossible fantasy. Now, a Christian might respond, well, what about modern secular states where everyone enjoys religious freedom and all beliefs are treated equally? The response to that is, first of all, traditional Christianity and the Bible do not endorse secularism. And second of all, in these secular states, which claim to treat all people equally, what they really do is privilege secular beliefs and a secular way of life, while Christians, Muslims, and all other religious groups are marginalized. When Christians, for example, try to preach their values in these secular societies, it's called hate speech. When Christians try to implement their values through the legal system, it's called a violation of separation of church and state. When Christians try to teach their values to their children, the state only allows a secular scientific worldview to be taught in public schools. This is not an equal system. This is a system that privileges secular liberal atheism. In this secular system, Christians, Muslims, and other religious groups are just marginalized dhimmis. When David attacks Islam by supporting this fake idea of political equality for all religions, what he's really doing is legitimating a secular system where Christians are second-class citizens that are being wiped out. In other words, David has no problem with Christians being dhimmis. He just wants them to be dhimmis under liberal atheists, not Muslims. In this debate, David Wood should just concede that there is no such thing as political neutrality where all beliefs and ways of life are respected equally. He should just admit that. Then his whole argument falls apart, because if Islam is bad because it doesn't give every minority group equal status, then all other religions and ideologies are bad too. David's criticism against Islam only makes sense if we were to assume that it's possible to have this neutral political system that privileges everyone equally. But such a system is impossible. The thing about Islam is that it is honest. Islam acknowledges that all systems are discriminatory, and Islam is the best and most objectively just system of government, given that reality. Meanwhile, Christians and liberals are living in this fantasy world. Look, Christians only have two options. Do you prefer a world where Christians are dominant? Or do you prefer a world where Christians are being dominated? Those are the only two options. So if David's whole criticism is that the Islamic system is discriminatory against Christians, yeah, of course, I concede that. But so is every other system. Every system that is not a Christian-dominated system is going to discriminate against Christians. So what is really the criticism here? Is David blaming Islam because it does not establish a Christian-dominated political theocracy? No, that would be silly. His actual argument is that Islam persecutes Christians because Islam is not secular liberalism. But guess what? Muslims don't want a secular liberal system because Muslims don't want to be second-class citizens dominated by secular atheists. Obviously, Islam is going to have a political system that privileges Muslims and Islam. Again, when Christians like David demand Islam to be more like secularism, they're basically saying, we don't want to be second-class citizens to Muslims, we want to be second-class citizens to secular atheists. In other words, David is perfectly okay with discrimination against Christians. He just wants to make sure it's liberal seculars doing it as opposed to Muslims. To summarize, yes, Islam does discriminate against Christians, but so does every other non-Christian political system. But honestly, this discrimination in Islam is not really that bad, because unlike every other non-Christian political system, Muslims genuinely respect Christians and genuinely share key Christian values. And Christians are much more likely to persist and preserve their religion under Islamic law than under any other system, precisely because of these shared values. Christians, for example, want a life that's organized around God and serving Him. Islamic law fully allows Christians to establish this for their communities. But secular liberalism has been in constant war against God. Christians want to get married and raise their families according to the Bible. Islamic law allows Christians to do this, but secular liberalism has all but destroyed Christian marriage and family. Christians want to transmit biblical values to their children through education. Islamic law fully allows Christians to do this, but secular liberalism says to keep God and the Bible out of the classroom. Christians want to create Christian businesses. Islamic law fully allows Christians to do this, but secular liberalism says, no, you have to bake the rainbow cakes whether you like it or not. So that's really the crux of the debate. Islamic law says to Christians, your lives are safe, your families are safe, your property is safe, your churches are safe. You can live by your own religious laws in your homes, your schools, your workplaces, but just don't try to convert Muslims, don't openly blaspheme against Islam, and pay an annual tax. Is this really the humiliation and subjugation of Christians that David is talking about? In reality, the most humiliated and subjugated Christians have ever been is under secularism. So Christians should ask David, what is it really that you're trying to promote here? Is it Christianity or is it secular liberal atheism?
Thank you very much for that opening as well. With that, we're going to jump into the rebuttals, and want to let you know, folks, if you enjoy debates like these and you have friends who enjoy debates like these, hit that share button and share this debate with them. That share button is just below. And with that, thanks so much, David. The floor is all yours for your 7-minute rebuttal.
Thank you, Daniel. And this has officially been the easiest debate in history. because it looks like we agree. The topic is, does Islam require the violent persecution of Christians? It seems like Daniel is saying, yes, absolutely, but everyone's doing it. Well, great. That's kind of irrelevant if everyone's doing it. The question is whether Islam does it. That's the topic of our debate. Let's go ahead and see where we're at. In my opening statement, I pointed out 3 ways that Islam requires the violent persecution of Christians. 1, Islam places so much emphasis on jihad and martyrdom that the violent persecution of Christians is inevitable. 2, Allah claims in Surah 9, verses 28 to 33, that he sent Muhammad to fight Christians and force Christians to pay jizya in order to silence Christians and keep us from saying that Jesus is Lord. You're obviously not going to silence billions of Christians without some serious violent persecution. 3, Muhammad clearly commanded his followers to kill apostates. So when Muslims leave Islam because they see through the lies and they become Christians, what happens? Islam says kill them. That by definition is violent persecution. So I laid out multiple ways that Islam does indeed require the violent persecution of Christians. How did Daniel respond? He didn't say anything that would address any of these points, except maybe thinking that dimitude isn't as bad as we might think, but we can always go into that a little further. Instead, he argued first that he says that he grants that Islam is expansionistic and that it discriminates against non-Muslims. No disagreement between us there, but as soon as he said that, the debate was over. This debate was over. We could have another debate on another topic, but on the actual topic of this debate, we agree. The answer is yes, Islam does require this. He says that other political systems do the same thing. Be interesting to look at debates, and I know Daniel's had debates on that before, but it's irrelevant. Every political system in the universe could call for the violent subjugation, violent persecution against Christians. That wouldn't change the fact that Islam does. So the question before us is whether Islam calls for the violent persecution of Christians, and we agree on that. Second, he admits that Islam eventually wants offensive jihad. So Islam is eventually going to go around, as Sheikh Asim al-Hakim says, that Muslims will eventually go door to door and offer the options. You either convert to Islam or you pay the jizya, or those are the options that are going to be given to Christians when Muslims are powerful enough to go around doing that. So obviously that's not a situation we want to be in. What's Daniel's response? He says, well, other ideologies do it too. It's great, but not relevant to our topic. Whether every other ideology in the world is more peaceful than Islam, or whether every other ideology in the world is even worse against Christians than Islam, is not relevant. The question is, does Islam require violent persecution of Christians? Third, he says, well, Christians follow the same pattern. This would also be irrelevant to the topic. But this is one thing I'll grant, is this is a thing that humans do. When any group of people get in a position of power, they try to maintain that power. That's a human thing. The difference is that's not built into our religion. That's not what the apostles commanded Christians to do. That's not what Jesus commanded us to do, to go out and violently subjugate the world, or to strive after political power wherever we can find it. Later Christians did that. That's not built into our religion. It is built into Islam. It's built into Islam to subjugate everyone else, and everyone else has to be under the authority of Islam. But with that said, completely irrelevant. We could grant, for the sake of argument, that Christianity somehow calls for the violent subjugation of the entire world. What does that have to do with the topic? Does Islam require the violent persecution of Christians? We agree on that. Fifth, he says that Christians are much more likely to preserve their religion and their values under Islam. Well, that's just ridiculous. There's no requirement right here in let's say the United States. There's no requirement that I'm not allowed to say that Jesus is Lord, that I'm not allowed to go preaching the gospel. There's no law here that says I can't go preach the gospel, and that someone can't believe the gospel and leave their religion and become a Christian. There's nothing stopping us here. Daniel, we're sitting here having a debate on this topic. We couldn't have this couldn't be conducted in the same way in a Muslim country that is officially following the teachings of Islam, because of some of the things I've said already. That would be a death sentence. So the idea that Islam will somehow preserve Christian values better than secular liberalism sort of leaves it to us to preserve it if we want to. And so that task falls to Christians to go ahead and do that. In Islam, it's, hey, you're a dhimmi now, pay us money, and whatever you do, you don't get to go around preaching the gospel. You don't get to go around criticizing Islam. You don't get to go around doing any of these things. And so you can just look at the impact that's had in the Middle East. There used to be Christian majority nations. Now you look at the number of Christians in that population, and you end up with 4 or 5% population of Christians in certain places. And so what happened there? Well, how did Islam preserve that religion for them? How did Islam help that? Well, you didn't. You treated them as second-class citizens and treated them horribly and persecuted them. And over a period of centuries, this sort of thing has an impact. Now, Daniel may say, well, secularism is going to do the same thing. That may be the case. Absolutely irrelevant. I'm not obsessed with controlling the world. I'm not told in my religion we're going to go out and subjugate the world. We're told we're going to be persecuted, that everyone's going to hate us, and that we're going to be on the receiving end of persecution, not that we're going to go out and become the persecutors. You have Christians who say, no, well, in order to avoid that, we have to go and become the persecutors. But in Christianity, we're told we're going to be the persecuted. So finding out that one day we may no longer be the world's top religion or something like that, it's not upsetting to us. In Islam, if you find out that you're not going to be able to subjugate the entire world, we got a problem, because that's what Muhammad said you're going to do.
You got to thank you very much for that rebuttal, David Wood, and we're going to kick it over to Daniel as well for his rebuttal, which is 7 minutes as well. And want to remind you folks, if you haven't yet, hit that like button. And Daniel, thanks so much. The floor is all yours.
Okay, David. So just to respond to your points, this is one thing that I want to ask you. When have Christians in history ever not sought to dominate Muslims as soon as they have the opportunity to do so? When? Name one time in history where Christians had power and they did not seek to dominate Muslims. You won't be able to find one example of that. And that's very significant, because Muslim rules with engaging, or Islamic rules for engaging Christians, are going to depend on Christian actions. And if Christians, as long as Islam has existed from the time of the Prophet, peace be upon him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Christians have been trying to dominate Muslims, then that is going to shape what Islamic policies are. So wherever you see this kind of domination, or you see this kind of reaction from Muslims, it's not like Christians are these little lambs that have been, sitting peacefully in Europe or in, the Roman Empire, or the Byzantine Empire rather, and they haven't had any kind of belligerence. No, they're actively crusading. They're actively attacking Muslims. They're actively expanding. Now, you may say that this has nothing to do with Christianity, but Muslims can't bank on what, your David Wood's peaceful pacifist interpretation of Christianity. Muslims have to deal with the real world. And in the real world, throughout history, Christians have been extremely belligerent, extremely expansionist. So that's what Islam is actually addressing. So another thing that you mentioned is this avalanche of apostasy that supposedly Muslims are going through. Where's the evidence for that? I recently just posted stats, official objective stats from Pew on who is actually experiencing an apostasy of an avalanche of apostasy. It's Christians. It's Christians. And why do you think that is, David? I mean, this is something that we should address. The reason is liberal secularism. This is what is causing the avalanche of apostasy for Christians. Muslims are actually gaining numbers in terms of religious switching. So you can put out all of these, stupid videos with quoting, what you call Dawagandists, saying things about, we have to worry about apostasy of our youth. That's all you have are sound bites and clips taken out of context. Let's look at the actual statistics about who is experiencing an avalanche of apostasy. You say Daniel concedes the debate. And that's false. I have not conceded the debate. Okay. The debate topic is that Islam endorses violent persecution. And implicit in this claim, or tacit to this claim, is that Islam supports measures which are not inevitable. But I just explained to you in a very clear way that this kind of violence that you're criticizing Islam for is actually inevitable. And you acknowledge that. You said this is human nature. And so again, I'll ask you, do you concede that any existing system counts as violent persecution? If you concede that, then it does take the whole wind out of your argument against Islam. You're singling out Islam as a system of violent persecution, because the implication of that is that this is not the same for all systems. You should make that explicit. You should concede that, yes, there's violent persecution in all systems, all political systems, including the secular liberal one. The term violent persecution implies injustice. It implies something that is contrary to human decency. So that's the definition that or the connotation of the word that I'm operating under with this debate topic. So I do not concede that there's violent persecution. I concede that there's discrimination, but discrimination is inevitable. Okay. You claim again that violent expansion is not built into our religion. Yes, it is. Violent expansion is not built into Christianity in the sense that you want it to mean, in the sense of, oh, well, right now, today, me, David Wood, I'm not going to go and start hacking people, as you put it. Rather, when I say that violent expansion is built into your religion, what I mean is that it is something that is morally acceptable according to Christianity. And in our last debate, you conceded this. You actually conceded and said that, well, if God commands you to go and murder or kill men, women, children, infants, and bash their heads on stones, if God commands it, then it's fine. There's no moral problem with that. So it means that according to your God, that is something morally acceptable to do. So you should really concede that. It is built into your religion, even though right now God might not be telling you to go and violently expand, but it's still a part of what God has commanded others to say, other believers to say in history, according to the Bible. You say that Middle East used to be Christian, majority Christian. Okay, fine. Yes, I agree that the policies of Islam have led to Christians converting to Islam over the course of 1400 years. But look at what secularism has done to Christians. Europe also used to be a majority Christian, hardcore Christian. Look at it now. Europe is the graveyard of Christianity. What has caused that, David? What has caused that is violent persecution, is real violent persecution and death and genocide. That's what you need to recognize. And it's Muslim Christians who have done it, Christians who have secularized, liberal atheists who have done it, but you have no criticism for those kinds of people. You also mentioned like a contradiction or a supposed contradiction in the Quran, that the Quran is saying, mentioning Jews and Christians on the one hand, and then the mushrikeen on the other hand. This is just an ignorance of Islamic theology. Mushrikeen, kuffar, is the non-believers. Kuffar is the larger category. And under that larger category, there are different kinds of non-believers. There are mushrikeen. That's another big umbrella. It's like a subcategory. And then mushrikeen have subcategories. So some are people of the book, Ahlul Kitab, are also considered mushrikeen, are also considered those who associate partners with God. And they're also non-believers because they reject the final messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, peace be upon him. So that's the definition of mushrikeen. There's no contradiction there.
Thank you very much for that rebuttal as well. And we're going to jump into open conversation, folks. If you happen to have a question, feel free to fire it into the old live chat. If you tag me with @ModernDayDebate, that's one way to submit a question, or super chat. Those get pushed to the top of the list. With that, thanks so much, gentlemen. The floor is all yours. And one last reminder, our guests are linked in the description, folks. If you haven't checked out those links, you certainly can right now. Thanks, Daniel and David. The floor is all yours.
I only detected one thing you said in your entire rebuttal. or really in your entire opening statement combined with your rebuttal, that would actually be the negative position on the actual topic. So I only detected one thing that is actually relevant to our topic, and that is your claim that you didn't concede that Islam requires the violent persecution of Christians, because you said violent persecution would require injustice, and you don't view it as injustice, and therefore it's not violent persecution. So killing apostates, violently subjugating people because of their religious beliefs and practices, saying that I have to subjugate this group because they say that Jesus is Lord, and force them to pay me money, that I have to go eventually, if I get into a position where I'm strong enough, that I would go door to door and knock on the door and say, hey, you either have to convert to Islam, or you pay the jizya, or and the idea that that's not violent persecution because you're just going to say it's not injustice. Well, notice any group that oppresses any group could say, well, we don't view it as injustice. So China right now with the Uyghurs could say that this genocide against the Uyghurs, it's not persecution. It's not violent persecution because we view it as perfectly fine and just. We view it as preserving our society. And so just changing the name of a term doesn't actually change what it is. Following this reasoning, you could go and drink alcohol and say, well, I'm not drinking alcohol, I'm drinking beer. I'm not drinking alcohol, I'm drinking champagne. See, I'm calling it by a different name, therefore it changes what it is. So it looks to me like if we were to agree on what it means to violently persecute people and say, well, it's not your personal preferences about what happens to be injustice, then it looks like everything else we agree on, that Islam does call for the violent persecution of Christians.
No, like even in the example of like a Muslim nation, an Islamic nation, or Khilafah, the Caliphate, there's not necessarily this requirement to constantly be at war with Christians. There can be peace agreements that are formed. And this is clear in the example of the Prophet, peace be upon him. This is clear in the caliphs, the righteous caliphs, in their example. And throughout Muslim history, Muslims have formed pacts and treaties, agreements with Christian nations and other nations. That is always on the table for the caliph or the emir to decide that, look, we're going to have this kind of agreement, but it's a qualified agreement. It's not, we'll never have any conflict with Christians ever, or we'll promise never in the future, in 1,000 years, not to invade Christian land. There's no agreement like that allowed in Islam. But for periods of time, for a generation, 2 generations, you can have that kind of peace agreement. And this is demonstrated by the Prophet, peace be upon him.
Now, let me just ask for a clarification, because I don't actually know your position. This has been my understanding of that whole process, because and this is based on trying to make sense of the progression we see in the Quran and the Hadith and the Tafsir, as well as what various Muslim scholars have said. But my understanding has been that everything is based on the pattern of Muhammad. When Muhammad is the persecuted prophet in Mecca, he preaches a message of, let's not kill each other, let's not persecute each other here. And then later on, he formed alliances and had a larger number of followers around him. Then the message changed to one of defensive jihad. You can fight now, or actually eventually required to fight in self-defense of the community. So if someone is attacking the community in various ways, then you would fight back, and Muslims should unite and fight back. And then eventually you have offensive jihad. Once Muslims were powerful enough to subjugate Arabia, then they subjugated Arabia. So I've always regarded what you were just saying about forming peace agreements, and you said that they're temporary. I have viewed peace agreements as temporary in the same way that Sheikh Asim al-Hakim views them. He says, yes, right now, when we're not powerful enough to go out and wage offensive jihad and fight and subjugate and force people into those 3 options, right now we should focus on, increasing our faith and building up our community until we get to the point where we're strong enough. So I'm not disagreeing with you that Islam allows treaties and peace agreements in various situations and so on, but as you pointed out, that seems to be temporary, and the goal doesn't seem to be peace. The goal seems to be, hey, we're not strong enough to fight right now, so it's in the best interest of the Muslim community if we agree to peace with these people who, as of right now, are too powerful for us to subjugate. But eventually we get strong enough. Once we get strong enough, then we're going to have to go and fight them. That's the pattern that I see in the Muslim sources. And I know there are Muslims who would agree with me. But yeah, that's your view?
I mentioned the two-tier strategy in my opening, and I mentioned how this is what every group has done, including Christians. When they didn't have power, they were about reconciliation and peace in the first 3 centuries of Christendom. And then as soon as they get power, they are expanding, they're persecuting heretics, they are killing non-believers left and right. This is also the history of Christendom. And it's only because Christians do not have power now that they promote this kind of freedom of religion and equality, free speech. Look, I'll ask you, David, a question. If you somehow had power over the entire world, okay, or you had become the dominant superpower, and your nation had this weapon, this futuristic weapon that could subjugate everyone throughout the world, okay, with the click of a button, even more advanced than nuclear warheads. You somehow have this technology as a Christian. Would you use that technology to actually create supremacy for Christendom, to make the word of Jesus Christ all high in the world? Would you institute policies that privileged Christians and that actually privileged the word of Jesus Christ? Is this something that you would pursue as king of the world?
I would implement policies that I believe are fair to everyone. I don't believe in making people if you convert because I'm going to persecute you or something like that, or I'm going to make you convert. I kind of don't regard it as.
I didn't say make people convert. I didn't say make people convert. I just say policies that privilege Christians, privilege Christianity. You're not forcing anyone to convert. You're giving an incentive.
The policies that I would think of as being beneficial to Christians would be beneficial to almost everyone, unless it's someone who wants to go out and subjugate and persecute other people and so on.
So you would institute policies that are preferential to Christendom. You just think that Christianity is the best for everyone.
No, I'm saying policies that I would regard as the best for Christianity would also be the best for everyone else who isn't trying to subjugate the world. Let me just give you an example, right? So you take the time of the apostles, when the apostles are going out and preaching and so on. There was a time when there was a conspiracy to murder the Apostle Paul. So his enemies in Israel wanted to get him from the Romans, to a Jewish trial because they were planning to execute him. They were planning to murder him along the way. And the Apostle Paul tells the Romans, hey, there's a plot to kill me here. Don't let them do it. And the Romans actually use their army to get him to safety. Then he's having a trial, and it's clear that people are coming after him based on certain claims that he's made and so on, that Jesus is Lord. And he says, I appeal to Caesar. Who's Caesar? Caesar's a total pagan. But the Apostle Paul was totally happy, saying, hey, I'm a Roman citizen here, and I have certain rights, and those rights are a benefit to me. Namely, people can't just randomly kill me over things. The government will protect me. So that's a situation where what was best for the Apostle Paul didn't need the Roman emperor to be a Christian and to enforce Christianity on people. Paul wanted the freedom to go around preaching the gospel and not to be interfered with. And so I'm fine with that. Like the Apostle Paul, I'm fine with that. I'm fine if the government says I'm not going to interfere.
This is irrelevant to the example that I gave.
Well, the things you're saying,
in my example,
the things you're saying are irrelevant to the entire debate.
No, it's not, because you're complaining about Islam wanting to have this kind of Islamic law implemented across the entire globe. And I'm giving you the exact same scenario. I'm saying if somehow Christianity was dominant and you could privilege Christianity through policies that would, basically through force of law, privilege Christian belief, incentivize conversion to Christianity, even punish blasphemy, let's say, but you can strike that if you don't want it. There's still law and order. You're not forcing anyone to convert, but you're just establishing a system where Christianity is privileged. And you said right now that, yes, you would want that kind of system because Christianity is the best. So you want a system like you're the king, but you would have like a Muslim vice president or vice king, and your administration would have Hindus and Buddhists and Muslims, because it's freedom and equality for all, right? According to your system, right? Yes or no?
Let me just give you my view, because it might help you understand things.
No, just answer the question. Just answer the question. You have these very long answers, David. You can just say yes or no. Why can't you say yes or no?
There's a huge misunderstanding here. You assume that political power is good in the sense of if your group can get into political power, then you can implement your policies. I view political power as something that will corrupt people once they have it, almost inevitably. So if you take Christians who for 3 centuries never crossed their minds to get violent, suddenly you give them a bunch of political power, and they've been persecuted for centuries now. It's a pretty natural inclination to say, all right, now we have to stop and never be in that situation again. So let's go out and strive for to maintain this sort of political power.
So you think that Christians should never have power? Because power corrupts, so Christians should never strive to have power. You want to live in a world where Christians are always being dominated by other groups?
Not what I'm saying. Not what I'm saying at all.
There are two choices here, David. Christians are dominant. They have a dominant system that privileges Christianity, or Christians are being dominated. Those are the only 2 options, logically. Which one do you prefer?
I would not trust a system where Christians dominate and enforce Christianity on other people.
So you want atheists? You want atheists to be dominant?
I don't trust any of them. That's the point. That's the point. That's the point. I don't trust anyone who's going to be implementing these kinds of policies. That's why if you're going to do anything, the best case scenario would be something that is best for the most people, where the government actually says, okay, there are certain things that we're not going to interfere with. If you guys get violent, then yes, we have to interfere with it. If one group is going to subjugate another group, then we have to interfere. But apart from that, we're not saying you have to believe this or you have to agree with that religion, or you're not allowed to say that religion. Daniel, you're free to walk down the street and preach your religion. I'm free to walk down the street and
no, you're not.
Preach my religion.
You're not free to preach your religion. This is something else I wanted to respond to. You're not free to preach the Bible. Go to any European secular country. There are hate speech laws. There in Finland, they just put someone in prison for sharing verses.
Then they would be screwed up. Then that would be messed up. If you're punishing people
it's hate
for
speech. It's hate speech. Yeah, it's hate speech. No. How is that? Secular justification. The secular justification is that these verses are hateful. You can't teach these verses
because I don't. But that's the point. I don't want governments to have that kind of authority over people, because inevitably they become corrupt and start crushing people. So I don't like it from secularists. I don't like it from Muslims. I don't like it from anyone.
No, that's based on their.
It's very simple. Don't stop me from saying what I want to say unless I'm calling for violence or something like that. You're saying they're doing it too. Great. Then I don't like it when they do it. I don't like it when they do it. I don't like it when Muslims do it. If Christians do it, I wouldn't like it when Christians do it. And again, nothing to do with the topic right now. Does Islam require?
No, it does. All of this has to do with the topic, because the topic is religious freedom and religious minorities.
The topic is not religious freedom. The topic is.
Those are the points that you're bringing up. You're saying that your argument was that Islam infringes on the rights of Christians. This is an infringement of your religious rights.
Absolutely.
So that's what the topic is.
I do want to move maybe into like a new zone of anything that's been brought up in the statement so far once you guys are ready. I know if you have one last thought on that, David.
Well, I didn't have any answer from David on this question. You want Christians to be dominated. So that means you want.
No, it's not. No, it's not. I would like a government that does not, that doesn't dominate us.
So you want a secular liberal. You want a secular liberal government.
You're asking me what kind of government I would prefer. It would not be any sort of government that is oppressing me or telling me I can't preach the gospel or anything like that. With that said, I'd be fine with a king if he's a good king. I'd be fine with democracy if it's pretty fairly well-informed people who aren't sending us into insanity and so on. So I'm fine with I'm fine with a variety of. Daniel,
what is it? Tell me what this government is.
I have no concept of here's the government that I want to impose on the world. And you're saying, David, what kind of government would you impose? I don't want to impose.
How can you criticize? No. You can't criticize Islam and Islamic governance and Islamic law if you don't have an alternative. What is the alternative? What is the alternative? I'm saying that Islam is the best alternative. Islam is the best alternative, and you're saying no, it's not. Okay, so give me your alternative.
I would say
clearly it's not a Christian-dominated alternative.
I would take almost anything except for maybe a really diehard communist nation, which I would regard as comparable to Islam. But the bottom line is look at the things you're saying. Well, they might classify something you say as hate speech, something like that. That's not nearly as bad. That's not nearly as bad as things would be for Christian.
We don't have to focus. Country. We don't have to focus on hate speech.
Topic? What about focus on the topic?
No. What about rights of Christians as a minority? How about marriage? Look at Christian marriage and how it has been disintegrated. How Christian families have been disintegrated over the course. Yeah, how likely it is for you to how likely is it for you to get divorced? How likely is it for your children to leave Christianity? How likely is it for you to transmit your values to your children? Very unlikely, increasingly unlikely, more unlikely by the day under a secular system that supposedly is giving you all of this freedom and equality. Like I said, look at Europe. Yes, it is the topic.
To be fair, I do want to move back to any of the topics that have been covered so far. This is where you guys would have a chance to address anything that's been brought up in your previous statements too.
Yeah, I am talking about what is the core of this debate, which is the rights of Christians and persecution and discrimination of Christians. That is the topic of the debate. And I'm saying that Islam, yes, it has discrimination, but it's actually discrimination that is more favorable to Christians. And there is literally not a single alternative. There is literally not a single alternative to Islamic law that David can propose that is better for Christians. And that's why you're floundering, David. You can't give me an example. And you even say that, my job is not to give you an alternative example. Okay, so you can see that there's literally nothing better that you know of to Islamic law. So you can just take these cheap shots at Islam without having an alternative.
If someone leaves Islam and converts to Christianity, and under Islam, you would execute him. You don't see why I would think that's actually worse than,
do you know the history of secularism? Do you know how many Christians were murdered in the French Revolution by the atheists? Yeah, you don't know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, great. Yeah. I don't like that.
That's the secular system
either. Listen.
So what's the alternative?
Daniel, listen to what you're saying. Does Islam require the violent persecution of Christians? There are all sorts of ways we can look at this, calling for the violent subjugation, making them second-class citizens, making them pay tribute money, killing apostates, things like that. And your response is, but the French Revolution did it too. It's like, it's not even the tu quoque because you're not saying I did it, but it's like a kid when you say, "Hey, Johnny, why'd you steal that candy?" Well, Mom, everyone was doing it. Everyone is doing it.
If something is inevitable, my argument is that this kind of discrimination that you're whining about and other apologists, that's something fundamental. No, it's discrimination. That's something that's inherent to any government system. And the modern secular system discriminates and persecutes Christians much more violently than anything that Islam has done. And the history of secularism has been far more violent in persecuting Christians than anything that has been done in Islam. And I think that your audience, most Christian conservatives,
all the threats I get are from the secular government.
Hey,
and atheists
who's trying to ban your channel?
Murder.
Who's trying to ban your channel? By the way,
that's true. I don't like that either. I don't like that.
That's
either.
secularism. So what if all Christian channels were being banned? Okay,
I'd have a problem with it. But just
of
notice,
course,
just
that's you're having a problem with it. So this is what secularism entails.
Let me make this little point. If when they do that, when they start banning channels and so on, in fact, you could go to my Twitter page when they ban Muslim channels. I actually complain and I say, hey, you shouldn't be banning this. What am I doing? I'm saying, hey, you shouldn't be taking sides in these kinds of religious issues and so on. But notice, suppose I were to complain to them and say, hey, you shouldn't be telling Christians or Muslims and so on what they're going to say. Imagine them saying, well, Muslims would do it too. Muslims would tell you what you can say too. That would be irrelevant to me.
Do you think that
would be irrelevant to me complaining to them about what they're doing? We're debating.
Do you think Holocaust deniers? Do you think Holocaust deniers should be banned? I want to see what's your level of free speech absolutism. Do you think Holocaust denial?
No. I think you should expose them. I think you should expose them as stupid.
Okay, so.
Yeah, I'm not.
How about a government? Okay, policy that says that if you're a Holocaust denier, or let's say you're a member of the KKK, you're a neo-Nazi, you're a racist, you cannot be in certain levels of government. You cannot take public office. You're banned from those positions. Do you agree with that?
I'd have to think about it. Again, Daniel. I'm not.
So neo-Nazis are okay to take official positions in the government, according to you.
No. I mean, what sort of
I just want to see which beliefs do you want to discriminate against? Because you say that you're open to all beliefs. There shouldn't be any policies against any belief. What about neo-Nazi beliefs? What about KKK? So in your ideal government,
this is such a simple topic. This happens.
Don't interrupt me, David.
In so many debates.
Do not interrupt me, David. Let me finish my thought. You are okay.
I ain't your dimmy here, but I'll go and let you continue. But the point is,
maybe soon.
Everything you're saying,
maybe soon, David. Don't speak too soon. It's not end of the debate over. We don't know if you're going to be my dhimmi or not. But answer the question. So are you fine or are you not fine with having neo-Nazis, KKK members, people with these kinds of beliefs, outright racism? They're not violent. They just espouse this kind of white supremacy. Are you fine with them being in positions of government, public policy, and being able to preach their views about white supremacy?
I think you have some people who aren't terribly far off some of that, and especially in Europe, you're getting people
that's not an answer.
Who aren't very far off from that.
You approve of that? Do you approve of that or not?
No, you're oversimplifying it. If you wanted to rule, if you wanted to rule people out, you'd have to describe the policies that would be used and show how they would be implemented in order to ensure that certain people with certain views are excluded. And if those policies...
Do you think they should be excluded? That's the question.
If those policies...
You're just rambling. You're avoiding the question.
Dude, I'd have to see the
You have to see the policy. The policy is neo-Nazis and white supremacists cannot take public positions in government. So they cannot be public school teachers.
The government only says that. The government only says that.
Yeah.
Just no neo-Nazis, right? No neo-Nazis.
Neo-Nazis, no KKK.
I think it would have to be more general. It would have to be if you hold views in the government calling for the racial superiority of one group or something like that, then again I don't know how you do this. You'd have to. It's not something you just decide and say this group is magically banned. And again, totally, completely, utterly irrelevant.
Yes, it is relevant. I don't know why you're relevant
from the topic.
Does
Islam
neo-Nazis
require the violent persecution of Christians?
Don't try to
let
weasel
me
out
give
of
you
it.
5,000 hypothetical scenarios about a government and how to rule out neo-Nazis. Does Islam require the violent persecution of Christians?
You're the one who talked about blasphemy. This is blasphemy. According to secularism, it is blasphemy.
Because the Quran talks about blasphemy.
Yeah, it is blasphemy. That's the topic of the debate.
Daniel, you can't.
Look, you're interrupting me. No, I let you talk. I let you talk. Don't interrupt, David. Don't interrupt. Let me point out the inconsistency so you can understand it, and the audience can understand it. You started out by saying that you wouldn't want to ban any kind of people based on their beliefs. So presumably you're okay with Muslims, with Hindus, with Satan worshippers, even in government. You want everyone to have a fair, equal shot at being in government. Then I asked you about KKK and neo-Nazis and white supremacists, and you said, no, we should have limits on those kinds of beliefs. So that means you have more of an allegiance to secular liberal ideas about blasphemy and what is out of bounds than you do of Christianity itself, than Christian norms and Christian values itself. That's the contradiction in your perspective.
You keep saying I said things that I didn't say. In fact, I said very clearly earlier that if every other system in the world called for violent persecution against Christians, it would not change the fact that Islam calls for the violent persecution of Christians. So,
but there's no win to that argument.
I really thought you had a philosophical background.
That's like saying Muslims are bad because they, eat living things. It'd be stupid because everyone
you're the one who asked for the topic. Does Islam require the violent persecution of Christians? I said yes. It sounds like you're saying yes, but saying no if we tweak the definition of what persecution is. But you're saying, well, everyone calls for the violent persecution of everything else. Therefore,
no, I said discrimination.
Therefore, Islam doesn't.
I said discrimination, and you weren't able to give me. You're not able to give me a single example of, number one, I asked you for Christians who haven't tried to dominate Muslims. Give me one example of that ever in history. You're not able to do that.
I'm not trying to dominate you.
No, but in history, prior to modernity, because now you're not in power. Christians are not in power. So I asked, when Christians are in power, give me an example where they haven't tried to dominate Muslims.
When Christians dominated Europe and America, they could have subjugated the entire world and kept it.
Yeah, they were trying to do that. Just listen to yourself, David. When Europeans, when Christians took over South America,
one second. I do want to give David a chance to respond there.
No, you're missing the point. Right now, Christians have enough. There are 2 billion Christians. We make up a third of the world's population, and we have some of the most powerful countries that the world has ever seen. I don't see a lot of Christians saying, hey, we need to go around.
Christians are not in power today. Liberal atheists are in power, not Christians. Christians are being jailed for citing the Bible. Christians are being called domestic terrorists when they go to their local schools and they demand that their children aren't taught Satanism. That's the reality of Christians. I'm surprised that you're trying to defend modern liberal secularism. It's shocking to me.
Not what I'm trying to defend. I'm saying I don't know any Christian. I know a lot of. Let me put it this way. I know a lot of Christians. I don't know any Christians who say, "Hey, let's go out and subjugate."
They're not in power.
Let's go out and subjugate the Middle East.
They're not in power. So.
Muslims aren't in power. You guys are still talking about going around and subjugating the world.
I acknowledge that. I know.
We're
honest. That's the honesty. That's the honesty of Islam.
Saying. Yeah, and that's actually an important distinction that you made just there. So even when you're not in power, there's still this plot to go around and subjugate the world.
It's not a plot.
Christians are doing what you're saying is, hey, anyone who gets into a position of power tries to maintain that power, especially groups that have been marginalized and discriminated against in the past. As soon as they get into a position where they can take power, they try to preserve it so that they're not in that situation anymore. I agree with that completely. There's nothing about most other ideologies and most other religions where it's built in there that, hey, there's this goal of subjugating the world and persecuting everyone and subjugating everyone and forcing them to obey the rule. You can say human beings do that. In fact, human beings will do that even if their ideology or religion says that that's bad. They'll still do it. There's just this natural tendency to do it. You say you're honest about it because it's actually part of your religion. So it's not really a choice.
It's part of your religion too.
It's not built into my religion, dude.
Yes, it is. Do you have a moral objection? Sometimes God just wants believers to engage in expansionist war. You conceded that in our previous debate.
There you misrepresented what I said too.
Sometimes, okay, this is the statement. Sometimes God just wants believers to engage in expansionist war. Sometimes in human history, maybe not now, but at certain points in history, God has wanted believers to engage in expansionist war. That's true, right? Jesus wanted that at some point. Yeah, as testified to in the Bible. Yes or no? Concede it. Say it.
I thought I made this entirely clear.
Say it, David. Say it.
No, because it's misrepresented. You're misrepresenting everything I'm saying.
The Bible,
right now.
sometimes God wants believers to engage in expansionist war. That's what the Bible says.
You mean sometimes now? No. So
not now. I didn't say now.
Okay.
Sometimes in the past.
Let me explain. Because I thought this was totally clear, even though it's completely irrelevant to this debate. In Christianity, we've been commanded to love everyone, to honor all people. That's what we've been commanded.
You honor them by subjugating them.
You would point out, no, that's what we're told. We're not honoring them by subjugating. Now you're doing what you did with the definition of persecution. Well, it's still just
you love them by killing them. You love them by killing them.
No, look,
that's what Augustine argued.
We are not in a position to say that sort of thing. If we're told
Augustine said it.
If we are told to live in peace with all people, and you say, well, to live in peace is to murder them all, great. Thank you for sharing your Islamic views.
Isn't the world going to be the most peaceful?
Hold on, we have to go into 2-minute segments if we can't stop the interrupting. I do want to give David just a little bit more time before we come back to you, Daniel.
Sorry. Apologies.
So when you're talking about the Old Testament, I'm pointing out that is not in a previous debate. I pointed out that what you had there, very different from a situation that we're in today. You have God actually there, pillar of cloud, pillar of fire, fills the temple, performing ongoing miracles, no disease, no miscarriages. They're ongoing miracles, and you have the visible presence of God. Any sin against God in that situation is not just a random sin. It's you're flying in the face of God. You're saying, hey, I know what you require. And I know you're the true God, and there's no disputing this. And I've agreed to follow these rules because I didn't have to agree. I could have walked away. I've agreed to follow this, and therefore there are harsh penalties, and that's associated. And that entire covenant is associated with a land. You're asking me, does God have the right to do that? Yes, I would say that God has a right to do that.
Okay.
Then but you said
God just wants believers to. Sometimes God will want believers to engage in expansionist war. You just said yes.
That's not no. Look, God could subjugate the entire world, as far as I'm concerned. If God wanted to come down here and take over the world,
that's morally valid.
That's not my objection.
That's morally valid. That's morally
not
valid.
my objection to Islam. First of all,
yeah, we know your objection to Islam is that Islam is not true. Yeah, we know that. Like, what kind of? But the thing that you do in your videos and in these debates is that you want to portray Islam as unjust. You want to portray Islam as somehow violating a moral code and doing something that's morally objectionable. And therefore, Islam is false because it commands something that's morally objectionable. My response logically to that argument is to say that no, you do not have a moral objection to expansion or war or violence or subjugation or discrimination or persecution. You do not have a problem with that morally because your own religion has advocated for it. And right now, just 2 minutes ago, you conceded that sometimes God, yes, he will command believers to engage in those types of behaviors. So your argument collapses. Your argument, it has no legs to stand on. That is the whole point that I'm trying to get you to recognize, that you're just arguing in a circle. Yeah, you're going to fall back on the idea that, oh, well, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam wasn't a true prophet. Okay, yeah, that's a separate debate. Okay, but the debate that, or the kind of reasoning that you employ is that Islam is false. Why? Because Islam commands its followers to do unjust things, to do things that are contrary to human morality. But that you can't make that argument. Why? Because according to you, Jesus also commands sometimes people to do exactly this kind of behavior that you're criticizing Islam for. And in fact, Jesus is commanding more than what Islam has required in the past. So you don't have a moral objection. That is the entire point. And getting back to the subject of the debate.
Can I answer? Can I respond to that real quick before, and then you can go ahead. Okay. So massive straw man of my argument. I've said in the past repeatedly, if I thought that Islam were true, I'd have to be on board with jihad. So it's not Islam is false. It's not Islam is false because it calls for the violent subjugation of the world. My position is not Islam is false because it calls for the violent persecution of Christians. The vast majority of the time, if I'm talking about jihad and what Islam commands, it's a response to politicians and journalists and educators and entertainers and lots of Muslim organizations and lots of Muslims, Muslim speakers, Muslim preachers who say Islam is a religion of peace and tolerance, and Islam has nothing to do with any of this. That was the mantra from the time of 9/11 on, that Islam is this religion of peace. I'm trying to show over and over again from the Muslim sources that that's not what Islam is. So this is not, so notice that's separate from the issue of Islam being true or false. I'm saying it's false to say that Islam doesn't teach these things. Islam does teach these things, right? So that's separate from the issue of saying
with the subtext,
it's false.
With the subtext that look at these crazy barbaric Muslims. Are you trying to pretend that that's not the whole subtext of all of your videos?
There are crazy barbaric Muslims. There are crazy
because if you're honest, you'd say,
crazy,
look,
barbaric, all kinds of people.
Islam does teach these things like persecuting the heretic or the blasphemer. If you're honest, you say, well, guess what? In the Bible, also Jesus has also commanded this in the past.
Notice if someone
that would be the honest thing to do.
Listen,
that would be
listen. If someone
instead of hiding it from your audience.
I'm granting what you're saying. If someone were to say the Old Testament never taught such and such, and the Old Testament did teach such and such, then it would be perfectly relevant to point that out. And you can point that out whether you believe in the Old Testament or not, whether you think it refutes the Old Testament or not.
Look at your comment section. Look at the people who are commenting on your videos and saying, yeah, look at these crazy Muslims. Look at how barbaric Islam is. Why don't you point to all your thousands and thousands of commenters on your videos and say, hey guys, calm down. I'm only pointing out, what Islam is about. We have these same exact things in the Bible. Jesus is cool with all these things too. There's no real moral objection here, despite my goofy videos. Why don't you say that?
There's obviously a problem. Notice, following what you're saying. So first, alcohol is allowed in Islam. Then later on, it's not allowed in Islam. So notice, if you were to say, hey, notice if you were to say, hey, alcohol is wrong, and I were to say, but it wasn't always. Therefore, he's being a hypocrite, and you can never say it's wrong because it was. Yeah.
If I said that there is something inherently evil about alcohol and something that is. Yeah, well, in heaven, believers, the denizens of the paradise in heaven, all drink wine. Yeah, there's something inherently evil about drinking. There are evil consequences of it. It's a consequentialist point, and it's banned on that reason in Islam, and the Quran bans it. That's the wisdom behind the banning of alcohol. But if I had that kind of response and said that, alcohol is inherently evil, that would be a contradiction, but you're strawmanning.
So I would agree. God has the right, if God wants to. God, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, if God wanted to wipe us all out and say, human beings are just too bad, I'm gonna wipe everyone out, I would think that God has the right to do that. He's the one who created us and sustains us for every moment of our existence. But what you have biblically is once you progress, so you have in the ancient world, so you're talking 1400 BC, very, very weird place. You have these rules for a particular parcel of land for a certain amount of time. Then when you get to the gospel, in other words, the final marching orders of Christianity. In other words,
you can contextualize all you want.
The Bible contextualizes itself. The final marching orders. If you read the Bible and say, what am I supposed to do now? I'm supposed to love everyone, to live in peace with everyone, to harm
until
no one,
Jesus returns,
to do good, to even if God
read Revelation. Read Revelation. Book of Revelation.
God will judge. That's
You'll
the point.
come
That's the point.
and you'll rule with the iron rod.
I trust Jesus to rule. I do not trust human beings to do a good job of it. That's what I'm saying. The final marching orders of Christianity right now, what are we supposed to do? Live in peace with everyone to the best of our ability. Doesn't always work like that. Love everyone. That's what we're commanded to do. Final marching orders of Islam, whenever you are in a position to do so, violently subjugate the rest of the world and impose dhimmi status on people and so on. And so to act like we're in the same ballpark, it's what you can say is, hey, I agree that that God has the right to do certain things. But as far as human beings having the right to do certain things now, I'd say no, because we've been commanded to do certain things. And so if
God
Islam,
told human
if
beings
Islam,
in the Bible,
Hold on,
God
just
tells
let
human beings
just let David finish that
in
thought.
the past,
I promise,
according to you, to
Oh,
do.
hold on one second,
expansionist war.
Daniel. Just to let David finish that thought, and then we'll come right back to you, Daniel.
Okay.
oh no, it's,
I thought he was done with this point.
yeah,
That's
I
why
was. Yeah, Daniel,
sorry.
sorry. Yeah, he didn't cut me off. I was done.
Okay, sorry about
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just a broken record at this point. You can go through all the contextual points that you want. No problem. I have no problem with this contextualization. I call it the magic of reinterpretation, actually. You engaged a lot of that, David. So no problem. Do that all day. But the point is that there is no moral objection that you have to expansionist war, to dhimmitude, to jizya, to punishing blasphemers, to killing heretics. You have no problem. You have no moral objection in and of itself to those things. No, you can't, because Jesus commanded those things in the Bible. You might think that, okay, now there's a period of time where it's not applicable, but you have no moral objection to any of those things.
So you have no moral, wait. You have no moral objection. You have no moral objection to alcohol, right?
In and of itself, no.
Okay.
Because it's something that at certain times can be made permissible by God.
Then we're using the term moral very differently here. And matter of fact, let me give you an example from the Quran. So I thought that you're not supposed to bow down to various things. Allah tells everyone to bow down to Adam, and Satan says no, and then Satan gets punished for not obeying what Allah commanded. When if you look at it, Satan's saying it's not just rebellion. He's saying, wait a minute, I'm fire. He's just made of clay and earth. Why am I going to be bowing down to him? It seems like Satan was actually, from an Islamic perspective, on the right page. Wait a minute, we've got Allah here, and we're not supposed to be bowing down to some mere human, so this must just be a test. And it turns out Allah was saying, no, you have to go ahead and do it anyway. So what I'm commanding you right now is what you have to do. If you have the commands that are directed towards me or the commands that are directed towards you, right? The command to go out and fight this group, something that's not directed towards me, and not directed towards you. There are commands that are directed towards you that aren't directed towards me. If I have commands that are directed towards me, I would say I have a moral objection to violating those commands. And you say, but there was some other time when, in a different place, thousands of years ago, where there was a different rule. Yeah, it's still required of me to obey the commands that my God commands me as part of the covenant I'm under. Keeping the commands of a covenant that I have entered into with God, obviously I have a moral reason to obey those commands. If I don't, then I'm violating a covenant with God. It doesn't get more moral than that. What you're talking about is, some hypothetical scenario where I wasn't commanded to do these things or something like that. Is something wrong just in and of itself in every conceivable situation? That's not what I'm saying.
That's what your audience thinks.
That's not what I'm.
That's what your audience that's what all of your audience, as evidenced by your commentators,
all of them.
Think. Yeah. At least the ones that I see cheering for your videos, they believe that, wow, you're showing how Islam is so barbaric because it has these practices, and the kind of moral reasoning that they're using in that moment when they're watching your videos and commenting on them is that these are inherently wrong practices. And they believe that Christianity or Jesus is all about peace. You should correct your audience. Say, no, guys, Jesus is not all about peace. Only in this current covenant is he all about peace. At all other times, he's been about expansionist war, violent jihad, smiting the unbelievers. He's going to actually come back in human form and do that, as the book of Revelation says. That should be your message, David Wood. So you need to be consistent.
I've talked about that, dozens of times and dozens of debates and so on. So I've discussed all that repeatedly. My objection to Islam is that Muhammad is the most obvious false prophet in history. That's my objection to Islam. But in addition to that, it also calls for the violent subjugation of the entire world. So people need to be aware of it.
As does every system.
People who say it doesn't need to be corrected and refuted. So that's my position, in case anyone's not clear on it.
1 minute
in
left.
Christianity, whenever Christians have had power in their history, regardless of what David
Nothing
and
to do with the debate.
his magic of reinterpretation, they have violently persecuted and subjugated. They have killed the most people in the past 200 years as a religious group, by far as Christians. So this does have something to do with the debate, because given that reality, yeah, Muslims are going to have certain policies that will try to limit the control of Christians in the Islamic lands, because they don't want to be massacred like these Christians have been doing for the entirety of their history. That's actually a very
Allah
concede
commanded
that.
that from all eternity. The Quran is eternal. The Quran is eternal. Allah commanded the violent persecution of Christians from all eternity.
David, if there's a group that has been wanting to violently kill you and your religion, does it make sense to have policies to kind of limit the control of those individuals in your society?
I'll give you a chance to respond, David, but then we do have to go into the closing statements.
Well, it's just, I mean, it's pretty hilarious that Islam expands from Mecca and Medina.
You're not answering the question.
No, listen, because you just massively misrepresented Islamic history. Islam expands across Arabia, expands across northern Africa, up into Europe, up into Spain, and coming from the other side as well, both sides of Europe, all along southern Europe, pirate havens and so on, expands eastward all the way until you get into India and China and so on. And to say, oh, it's just because everyone's attacking us. Dude, you didn't expand like that by defense, defending yourself against.
I never claimed that. I never claimed that.
If Muhammad had stayed,
you're the one who's claiming that Christians are these innocent little lambs, and they're being persecuted by all these Muslims. Okay, yeah, you're complaining about Muslim policies, and I'm saying that those policies are actually very reasonable.
That's the topic you suggested. Does Islam require the violent?
Exactly. I'm saying that this discrimination actually makes a lot of sense given the violent nature of Christians as demonstrated through history, not the magic of reinterpretation of David Wood.
We have to kill the apostates because of the violence of Christianity.
We have to stone the heretics.
We'll jump
the heretics, as Moses said.
I guess we'll end with that. Let's see the 4-minute conclusions. We're going to start with, as we started at the start, we'll start with David for the conclusions and then wrap up with the final speech from Daniel before we go into Q&A. Thanks so much. David, I got the clock set for you at 4 minutes. The floor is all yours.
All right. So as far as the actual parts where we stuck to the topic, in this debate, I've shown that Islam does require the violent persecution of Christians, given any reasonable, rational definition of what violent persecution would be. Daniel's initial response was that somehow it's not violent persecution if he regards it as just, but, killing apostates and things like that. That's still violent persecution. What you just say is it's just. We have to do this. But that's an agreement. So I've shown that Islam does require the violent persecution of Christians. Islam calls for the violent subjugation of the entire world and encourages an obsession with martyrdom. This leads to the violent persecution of Christians. I showed that Muslims are commanded to subjugate Christians until Christians no longer say Jesus is Lord. This is directly out of the Quran. This is Surah 9, verses 28 to 33. Every justification and requirement for fighting Christians in that passage has to do with our basic religious beliefs and practices. So if there's a command to fight us until we pay the jizya and feel ourselves subdued, we feel ourselves subjugated, and we pay jizya in acknowledgement of our inferiority, that's violent persecution, especially when it's all based on us proclaiming that Jesus is Lord, that Jesus is the Son of God. Because we claim that Jesus is the Son of God, we have to be silenced by enforcing dimitude on us. And the pattern is we can either convert, we can relinquish our rights to at least publicly proclaim the gospel, or we can be killed. So that's obviously the violent persecution of Christians. If it's, hey, we have to violently subjugate these people to keep them from saying Jesus is Lord. And notice even there, there are passages of the Quran that talk about self-defense. Allah, in this crucial passage, does not say, hey, Christians are going to be out to get you. Christians are going to come after you. Therefore, you need to defend yourselves. What does he say? Hey, they're preaching the gospel. They're preaching that Jesus is Lord. You have to subjugate them and silence them. How are you going to do that? By sending Muhammad with the religion of truth to prevail it over all religions. And I pointed out that Islam requires Muslims to execute apostates who convert to Christianity. Killing someone for converting to Christianity is obviously violent persecution. Now, Daniel seems to agree with most of what I said that's actually relevant to the debate. So it's clear that even if he wants to redefine some terms, he believes that Islam requires quite a bit of violent persecution against Christians. And so what he's arguing is, but everyone does this, that Christians have done it, that every ideology you can come up with would do the same thing. Certainly wouldn't do it in the same way. And you can you can ask Christians where they'd like to live. You can ask Christians in various places in the Middle East. I get messages all the time, David, can you help me get out of this country? So the proof is in the pudding here. And so what's Daniel's position? It's that everyone is doing it, and therefore we don't have the right to complain when Islam does it. But notice, this debate is not even about whether it's right or wrong. It's not about whether it shows Muhammad to be a false prophet or not, whether it shows Islam to be, a false religion or not. It's simply, does Islam require the violent persecution of Christians? And I would say, indisputably, it does. Any honest reading of the Muslim sources say that it does. So this debate was over from the opening statements. This debate was over because we really granted the core of the debate. Everything else since then has been off-topic smokescreen.
Thank you very much for that closing statement, David. And we are going to kick it over to Daniel for his closing as well.
How long is it? How long is the closing?
That was 4 minutes. And same for you, Daniel, 4 minutes.
Okay.
Folks, our guests are linked in the description. Don't forget to check them out. And thanks, Daniel. The floor is all yours.
All right. So a couple of points that David brought up. Islam does not subjugate Christians for teaching their religion. Ahlul Kitab, Ahlul Dhimma, the protected people within the Islamic State, are allowed to teach their religion in their churches and their synagogues. They are allowed to raise their children as Christians, as God-fearing Christians. Islam does not prevent Christians within an Islamic nation to teach the Trinity or to teach any of those kinds of beliefs. So this is a misrepresentation from David. If you go to Muslim societies today, you will find Christians that are teaching the Bible, they're teaching the Trinity. And in many of these Muslim societies, the Christians are actually doing very well socially. In Egypt, the richest Egyptian family is actually a construction company family who are Christian, Coptic Christians. On the issue of blasphemy that David keeps bringing up, all societies punish defectors and deter defection, leaving the group. All societies do this. All religions do this. This is something that is acknowledged morally, again, within the Bible. It is found in Mosaic law, and we see this within the practice of Christians. It's only liberal Christians today who have no power and who have no influence who are preaching this kind of pacifism and, oh yeah, it's fine for blasphemy to run wild, and how dare Islam have punishments for blasphemy. This is like a really weak and defeated kind of pathetic attitude from Christians to criticize, or liberalized Christians to criticize, Islam for this. Throughout this debate, David has not answered a single question that I had. Literally, very basic questions that even the Christian audience who are watching this are probably ripping their hair out, asking, why isn't David able to, for example, say if he does or does not want neo-Nazis serving in government positions, or should those kinds of views be deterred or prevented? Like, such a simple question. He did not answer that. He didn't answer the question, name me one system that doesn't discriminate against religious minorities. Name me one. The secularism that you are preaching, David, without actually calling it secularism, does discriminate and persecute Christians. Ask any Christian. I don't know what part of the world you live in, but where I live in the South and the United States, Christians are acutely aware of all of the oppression or the tightening of the noose around their necks by the secular liberal state. And America is not even the best example, because America is a little bit delayed in wiping out about Christianity. Look at European history, the very beginning of secularism, what that was about, and look at Europe right now. It's the graveyard of Christianity. Why? Because that is what secularism does. It's much worse for Christians than anything that Islam has ever done or could conceive of doing. David has not answered. Explain how secularism is not about discrimination and persecution, and explain, tell me, David, do you want Christians to be dominant or dominated? Like, such a simple question. David couldn't answer. He gave some kind of weird answer that, oh, human beings are always corrupt. Okay, well, what about all of Christian history? What about all Jesus himself, who is supposed to come in human form? Is he going to be corrupt when he, as described in the book of Revelation, is going to come and rule by the rod and rule by the sword? So this whole debate, your strategy has been to sidetrack the discussion by arbitrarily restricting the topic. Okay, the topic, I wanted to debate deeper issues about the meaning of discrimination, being a religious minority. All you did was say, oh, that's irrelevant, that's irrelevant. Things that are very relevant to this debate, you sidestepped, you avoided, you weaseled your way out. That was your debate strategy, David. And I think everyone is able to see that, was able to see that.